We are presenting Leon and I together on the topic of youth homelessness. And just to give you a little bit of a background on who we are, Adam, if you would move us to our next slide. Um, I am Adam Jenkins. As Pastor Adam mentioned at the beginning, I am a senior regional coordinator for the Second Home program, which is a host home intervention, and I'll explain a little bit more about that later. But we are a program of Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon, and I do use he, him, his pronouns. And I'm also, incidentally, a person who has lived experience of homelessness as a youth myself. Leon, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Leon Burris. I'm a policy consultant, and I do a lot of work with Clackamas County. I'm also a member of the Clackamas Youth Action Board, which seeks to address youth homelessness, and all of the members have lived experience, and also address other issues touching homelessness like substance abuse, sexual trafficking, and mental health. And I use he, him, or they, them pronouns.
Next slide, Adam. So in a good presentation format, we're going to tell you what we're going to tell you, and then we're going to tell it to you. So this is our basic format. This is what you can expect. We are presenting youth homelessness today, youth houselessness, as a crisis, a very real crisis in our city, in our metro area, in our tri-county region. So first, we're going to have Leon Burris present the kind of conditions about how it became a crisis. How did we get here? We call that portion of the presentation. Why are we being asked to speak with you today? Then next, I will go into exactly what does here look like. And to be honest, we've not had a whole lot of good data on youth that have been experiencing homelessness. The state of Oregon has only started keeping record of that data truly since about 2016, 2017. So we have very few years of what it looks like. However, it is a growing concern, and the state is putting more attention here. And then finally, we'll wrap up our presentation with some very objective things that we can take away and action items that we can begin to do that would help us solve this crisis truly. So Adam, I'm going to step off the side. I believe the next several slides are Leon, who will be taking a look about how did we get here.
So, I would recognize our housing crisis as having three main factors, and the first being, and I'm going to go into each of these more in the following slides. The first factor is we have a culture, a Western or American culture, that prioritizes youth moving out at 18 and becoming financially independent while in school. The second factor is that housing and the cost of living have become less affordable over time. I'm sure many of you feel that or recognize that yourselves. And the third factor is there's a lack of support around essential needs like food, counseling, healthcare, and education for our young people. So I have two little graphics here. The graphic on the left, and all of this data is from like 2015, which isn't the most up to date, but is some of the most recent data that I could find. And so it says almost a third of young people today, 18 to 24, are living in their parents' homes, which is the highest percentage since 1880. And so, what are some of the leading causes of youth homelessness? The number one reason that people aged 14 to 24 experience homelessness is because of relationships. If one third of young people are living in their parents' home, and then that relationship starts to deteriorate, there are, not a lot of other options for where you're going to live. And then, one of the biggest strains on family relationships as well are finances. And so, would you switch to the next slide? So, and then another major factor is family conflict and stigma over being LGBTQ, or facing stigma in supportive housing services as well over those things, and not being able to find safe shelter even after starting to experience homelessness. And so in America, LGBT people make up a disproportionate 40% of the homeless youth population. And then there's a little poster of like, I am homeless because I am gay, which is a really unfortunate reality. Um, I know that in my particular experience that influenced my homelessness of like for me being queer was a huge factor in like safety and well-being. Um, and a lot of that stigma does come from our religious communities. Um, and maybe having a place to live, but it's a qualifying like if you deny that part of yourself or if you um, can successfully lie about it. Um, which I feel like should also not be the case. And some people will choose homelessness rather than the alternative, which because it's to lie or to hide that because it's more of a strain on your mental health to lie sometimes than it is to not have a place to live. Next slide, please. So goes more into the financial reality and the economic reality. Is that I'm sure many of you have seen similar graphs, but inflation rises every year, which is normal, but often our minimum wage or even above minimum wage don't rise to reflect that. And so real wages are stagnated, and the costs of rent keep going up as well because of things like monopolies and it's less realistic for a young person today to be able to work full time and have a place to live on their own. Next slide. And then the third factor is there's a less investment in social services. Here you can see a little pie. I think this is again from 2015, but a military budget makes up 54% of our federal spending, and that's an even higher percentage in 2021, has risen every year since then. Um, and you can see housing and community 6% of our budget, even though we do have a federal housing crisis. Um, I believe as I've had many opportunities to speak with state officials about investment in youth social services, and um, some of the pushback you get is like, "Oh, we absolutely do believe there should be investment in these things, but it's just not in the budget." And my kind of response to that is, a budget is a moral document, and it should reflect our values. Um, and so my push, and I believe that other people's push, is that we should demand that our legislators and policymakers are reflecting the values that they expose and the values that we hold, which are that to care for one another in community. Uh, Next slide. And I'm going to switch over to Adam now.
Thank you, Leon, for bringing us up to speed, a little bit of the conditions that led us to this place. Um, and, to that last point, it's boggling my mind. That was from 2015. I think this is the first year that military spending is under all of the other ones combined, like all those other categories that you saw. And it's still like to the tune of, $750 billion a year, while HUD, has an investment of about $50 billion a year, and I think $3.5 billion maybe get dispersed to the states for supporting supportive housing services, which I view largely as the pathways, and I'll talk about this later. The pathways by which we help folks overcome housing instability and homelessness. So just like we have pathways in education to get into various careers, there are options funding pathways out of housing instability. A shelter is not the silver bullet to ending the houseless crisis, If we view housing stability as one, having your own lease, keys in hand, and the means to afford the rent on that place. So anyway, I am going to talk a little bit more about those things and how we can get there. But first, I think we have to understand what here looks like specifically. So there's three things I'm going to iterate here. One, there's very limited housing options. Ask any real estate expert, realtor among you, what the housing stock looks like today, what the housing prices looks like today, and they will tell you it is in the most tight market they've ever seen. They simply do not have enough housing stock, and they would tell you it's all types of housing. It's affordable housing all the way up, to upper bigger housing stocks for single families. And that's putting a crunch on the housing prices, which then is putting a crunch on rental prices. So we need to increase housing stock. I'm not going to go into slides on that. You, like I said, can ask any realtor that about that. Second point, high rates of chronically houseless and homeless individuals. I'm not going to go into slides on that either. I would encourage you to take a trip around the Portland Metro. That is something very real that you can see for yourself. We're seeing more chronically houseless and homeless individuals, and that is evident by the camps and even the recent fires and things like that you have seen. But the third thing I am really going to dive into, because it's the point of our presentation today, along with this comes an increasing rate of youth houselessness and homelessness in particular. And this is something that was largely thought to have not exist for the longest time. And so I'm hoping to open our eyes to that reality and show some good data that the state has been collecting and some work that they've been doing on this. I do need to note that the data in the next slides comes from a CSH assessment. There are organizations that help communities envision the ideal system as well as review data, which was compiled from HMIS, which is the Homeless Management Information System, as well as something called SB1 data. SB1 passed in 2019. It's a review of all systems, healthcare, ODHS, child welfare, juvenile justice, that are exiting people to places that are not housing. They're not housing places. They would be considered housing unstable or without home. And so this assessment and review of the data was also done alongside of the Youth Action Board with individuals participating who have lived experience of houselessness and homelessness in this community and have very real ideas about how we can help folks to overcome these challenges. So next slide, Adam. And I see we are coming up on time here, so I'm going to move through some of this very quickly, but I'm going to highlight some data for you. So based on those reports, the SB1 data and Homelessness Management Information System, in the metro area alone, there's over 3,500 plus young people, 14 to 24, who are experiencing houselessness to the point where they are in need of housing supportive services. And so in the over 18 space, that specifically looks like nearly 2,800. And then 14 to 18, we have 704 individuals already identified in need of these services. The blue column on the end there, past the circled numbers, that figure is what is known as McKinney-Vento data. If you didn't know, every school district has a liaison that's in charge of identifying youth that are in need of additional supports because they are experiencing a barrier to their schooling, which is houselessness. And so they work with the community to try and identify these students and additional supports. What you need to know is that definition is a little bit broader than the HUD definition. So it's separate from the two data points. And some of them are duplicated. Some of those individuals are in the HMIS SB1 data, and some are not because that definition is a little broader. For the school purposes, a youth who is couch surfing, which is technically a placement for human habitation, it's not fixed, regular, or adequate necessarily. They would include those students in that data as well. So doubled up families, so on and so forth. And so that's just the metro region. The statewide total is that figure below. That is almost 8,300 youth, not including the 3,200 they counted in schools across the state, maybe some duplicated. But essentially, if we don't intervene or do preventative measures now, that number could easily go up to 12,000 individuals between the ages of 14 and 24 that are experiencing homelessness to the point where they need intervention. So let's go to the next slide. So I'm going from state down to county now. The same organization did the same assessment in 2019 in Clackamas County. And at the time, they discovered an annualized need of 550 youth in Clackamas County in need of that service. Since then, in that time, that 2-year window, that has since been revised upward to 800 plus youth in Clackamas County. And as well, when we were doing this assessment, like I said, we visualized the ideal system by the supportive services that would help these young people overcome houselessness and housing instability. We estimated that we would need about $12 million to be allocated so that we could provide these housing supportive services for youth. Fortunately, we had a grant of $1.7 million that allowed us to scratch the surface. And we brought alongside with us some really great organizations that are doing some really cool interventions to help out. Let's go to the next slide. So to hone it down even further from the state to the county to the local school district that Clackamas UCC is connected with most, we have data from the McKinney-Vento liaison, who I described earlier, by living situation. So in the North Clackamas School District this past school year, we had 33 young people living in shelter, 260 young people doubled up. That's that doubled up figure I mentioned. So technically a placement for human habitation, but not necessarily fixed, regular, or adequate. So probably going from home to home or couch to couch. 18 young people unsheltered, 20 young people staying in a motel hotel, usually paid for by an agency, whether it be a church community, faith community, or another type of community-based organization. And then the most mind-boggling one here, we have 71 young people experiencing houselessness and housing instability on their own in the North Clackamas School District. That would be unaccompanied homeless youth. This is public data, by the way. You can go to the source there, Oregon Department of Education, McKinney-Vento Act, Homeless Education Program. You can find this data on any school district in the state of Oregon, and any school district in the country, probably. All right, so let's go to the next slide. So how do we solve this? I realize like this could be a huge information dump and it can kind of feel overwhelming. But as I mentioned in that same assessment with the Youth Action Board, members of our community that have lived experience of houselessness and homelessness, we came up with a pretty solid solution. So the first little thumbnail in the upper left there is an ideal mapping system for the under 18 space in particular, considering the juvenile justice system, the child welfare system, and the interventions that we would envision. We came up with 3 primary ones: the host home intervention, which is what Second Home is, the program that I work with, transitional housing intervention, as well as a rapid rehousing intervention. We also envisioned that we would need mobile outreach and navigation, so helping young people navigate the partners that operate these interventions, as well as a safe drop-in center for youth who are experiencing houselessness and homelessness, where they can come to a safe place to be, to get essential needs and connected to services, as well as crisis support. So that would be either shelter, host homes, or transitional housing that operated in a tonight sort of manner. You can call them, they have a place to go tonight. We came up with the percentages of who we would think would be needed these services. Once again, we did that alongside of folks with lived experience. And then the thumbnail directly, I guess, this way, we determined about what the approximate average time each one would need. So that's how we came up with that $12 million figure. And envisioning the system. This is what we would fund with it. And this is about how much of it we would think we need to use. Next slide. So that's all to say, we did the hard work already. We already did this, and we found it by down to the unit how much of each type of housing support we would need. From the crisis housing in the 18 to 24 space, we have 25 units there. Medium-term housing, we need at least 393 to address the need in Clackamas County. Crisis housing, 14 units for the under 18 space. And family-based setting is another way of saying medium-term housing. That looks like supported family reunification, which we modeled that about 1/3 of youth experiencing housing crisis could be interested in. Supported kinship, that's finding family members that support you in your identity and want to be there beside you, but may need a little support in doing that. And then long-term host homes, which is intervention that we currently specialize in. The unfortunate news is $1.7 million investment was not quite enough to do it, and it takes time to bring these interventions online. And it didn't fund everything. It only funded a portion of those pathways. So, for example, there are 0 shelter beds in Clackamas County for 14 to 24. It's a critical infrastructure to this whole thing, and we don't have it in Clackamas County. Second home host homes, we have been operating this intervention in Clackamas for about 3 years now. And we have had at least one host home that has operated on an emergency basis where I've called them up that day. They were able to provide a room for a client who was in need. And we have about 5+, I'm going to say 5+ transitional housing units currently, and 36 units of rapid rehousing. I think I could honestly say we have probably about 40 units plus of rapid rehousing at this point for 18 to 24 in a less emancipated. So that's why we did the modeling for both systems. Is it gets a little tricky when you're providing these interventions for folks under the age of 18. But actually, Oregon has some lenient housing laws that you can sign occupational agreements at the age of 16, or if you're under 16, if you are pregnant, parenting, and have the intention of living with your child. So we can absolutely provide these services for young folk, and landlords can absolutely rent to folks in that category. We just find that there's still some barriers there as far as like ageism and folks just not knowing that, this not having this information. And barring you kind of arbitrarily at the 18 number. So anyway, let's go to the next slide. Yeah, so I'm going to invite Leon back up here, and we have just 3 more points for you all, if you can bear with us. Just 3 more. This is our what can we do about it, right? So as I mentioned, we already did the hard work. We already envisioned the ideal system that we need. We've actually already identified some really great resources, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. Adam, if you could switch the thing. So there we go. I think that's perfect. So what can we do about it? What can we as people today? So the first thing we can do, we can house the people. Anything that we can do to house the people is so important. That 0 shelter option, that's a problem. If we can't house the people immediately, it's so hard to get the next things in place so that we can actually provide a pathway into stable housing. So housing is the solution to the housing crisis. Incidentally, more housing and more options for getting people sheltered as a basic need, such as food and water, will be helpful. We can learn more about the issues and the organizations that are working to end this crisis, and I'll have Leon will tell you about all the wonderful organizations, particularly working in this youth space. And then I would encourage us to talk to our elected leaders. As I had mentioned, the resources have been identified. They're there. They just need a little bit of urgency to be implemented as a crisis. So let's go to the next slide. Let's house the people. This is where I'm talking about hosting a youth. Would you host me? That's what I'm asking you today. As once a homeless youth who shortly after moving to the West Coast found himself in a very tight situation for my housing. And I actually learned to live in the woods is what I did instead. Hosting a young person can make such a huge difference in their lives, especially young folks that are working really hard to get the education and the career development skills they need to obtain the wage that would allow them to have housing. And so this is absolutely a powerful intervention. The host home intervention, the best and simplest I can describe it, is we are like a host network for foreign exchange students, except we are designed for hosting members of our own community while they work toward achieving their immediate goals. Second Home, being a partnership between school systems and the local mediating center, we essentially introduce folks with resources to folks who could use resources. And usually that's on a what we call a long-term basis. Our average stay is roughly 8 months. And it is for the goal of educational attainment. And that could look like high school, community college. It could look like doing career development programming. And we are partnered with the other housing interventions that would help a youth then to maybe move into a rapid rehousing unit, securing their own lease. Or sometimes our youth get really great jobs and move into their own units without that type of support. So the picture here in this slide, for example, is a picture of one of our young people who is turning the key on her very first apartment after graduating a local school and getting a wonderful job with the organization known as Survey Monkey. And so she is doing quite well. And yeah, that's sort of the power of our program. But there are other many great programs in our community. So if we could go to the next slide, we'll have Leon highlight the many programs that you could learn about.
I also wanted to say something really quick about the host home program, which is that I'm also a graduate of Second Home, where I stayed with someone in the community for probably 6 months. And I think that people are afraid of having a stranger in their house. But the thing is, like as young people with not a lot of support, you need people to take a chance on you and for people to invest in you to be able to like grow as a person and be able to um, accomplish the things that you need to accomplish and to like move on with your life and get into housing. Um, so some of the organizations, the organization I'm a part of is the Youth Action Board, which is a little house with the rainbow. I've worked with all of the organizations on this list to like help them develop and understand the experience better, and also like share my vision, and the other members of the Youth Action Board share their vision for what would have been most effective when they were experiencing homelessness, and then we help them get the money to do it. So Dev Northwest does a lot of rapid rehousing programs. They also do financial education. So they'll like sign a lease for a young person, and then the young person will be in agreement with them instead of the rental company, to help lower the barriers like having a credit score, having high enough income, etc., etc. There's also Parrot Creek slash True Housing, um, and they have like shared living situations where people can come and learn basic life skills like cooking, and I think they also do like emotional awareness sort of workshops for people who get into conflicts often and need like more education around solving them and living with other people in a healthy and effective way. There's also Ant Farm, which they do employment opportunities. It's just a safe place to go. They do homework help. It's a drop-in center. There's the living room, which is LGBTQ plus specific, and they have a lot of things for basic needs. They help with name changes and food and hygiene items and like a lot of basic supplies. And then it's also a really important social network for youth to feel supported by their peers and then older people who have been in the same position as them. And then there's also Youth Era, which is another drop-in center, but it's in Milwaukee. The other Ant Farm's rural, and Youth Era does peer support as well. So it's like counseling, but like lower. I'm not sure if people are familiar with the idea of peer support, but it's people in your age range who have gone through like a basic certification program to be able to like counsel you and hang out and just like feel supported. And I would totally endorse being involved with any of these organizations and support the work that they're doing.
Yeah, thank you, Leon. We will also be putting these organizations in the chat for you all with the links to their website so you can go and find out more about their work and potentially how to get involved. Like, for example, I know some of these organizations are hiring specifically for youth housing navigators. So if you are interested in this type of work, especially now, it may be a good time to look into those organizations. Next slide for us, Adam. My last appeal for us today, and I once again want to thank you so much for bearing with us and staying with us to the very end. My appeal for you is speak to your elected officials. Your Clackamas commissioners need to hear from you. The funds are out there to the tune of $2.5 billion over the next 10 years. The Metro Area Housing Supportive Service measure passed, and it can provide the funds to effectively end youth homelessness and probably homelessness more broadly. And this could go a very long way. Could go a very long way if it's allocated efficiently and correctly, and with the cooperation of folks that have lived experience and who know better than most experts about the services that they need. And that these services will need to be implemented in lockstep with one another. If we have, like I said, any gap within that system, like the critical infrastructure of shelter, then we can't actually work from a place to provide the pathways into stable housing. And also, if we have Multnomah County and Washington County moving forward without Clackamas County, for example, we have a big hole within that system, and actually could create the scenario where a county would lose professional experience, and as well as the citizens then who would be ultimately helped by the services of the other two counties. So it's very important that the counties work together to solve this crisis because homelessness really doesn't respect county lines. And so the commissioners have the ability to begin this work right away. And the Housing Authority is ready to begin overseeing and organizing this work. It's just sometimes, there's a lot of things going on in the world. There's a global pandemic, and there's this whole conversation about, whether or not folks should be wearing masks. It can get really, it can get really confusing and really chaotic. And sometimes our elected officials overlook really big challenges that are within our midst, and that we could be acting with urgency and efficiently to begin solving this crisis. So I would encourage you to reach out to your elected officials, provide some of the education that you might have heard here today, research the really great organizations that you've heard about, and let the folks know that there is absolutely a way. There's absolutely sun on the horizon here. We're constantly in crisis, and we can constantly sing the songs of hope that bring people peace and ultimately house their basic needs. So thank you for your time. Next slide. If you would like to reach out to me about any of the things that you've heard about today, you can see my contact information is there. That's A Jenkins at EMO. A Jenkins at EM Oregon. Don't put the extra O in there. It's just emoregon.org. Or you can call me on my cell phone. And I want to thank my colleague, Leon Burris, for presenting with me today from the Youth Action Board of Clackamas County. One of the links that we included into that list was the Youth Action Board website. It's amazing, and all the work they do is spot on. And if you are a young person who is experiencing housing crisis yourself, please do not hesitate to reach out. That last line is the Clackamas County Youth Housing Access line. That will get you in touch with our partners over at Northwest Family Services, who have diversion supports, which are immediate supports, perhaps with gas cards, with food, if they've fixed people's laptops. If there's something that you could use to help your journey, they also have the access connection then to many of the programs that we talked about today. So that is one of the best resources for a youth in particular who's experiencing a housing crisis at this point. So please do reach out. And I also cannot plug the Here Together campaign enough. This is a group of elected officials, as well as service providers, as well as just very supportive community members and many faith community members who care deeply about these issues and are very passionate about enacting change and solving this crisis and being better neighbors for our citizens, our members of our community across the Portland metro area and in Clackamas County, especially. So thank you so much for having us today. Leon, would you like to say thank you?
Yeah, I didn't have a chance to put my email on there, but if you go to the Clackamas Youth Action Board website and email their organization email, I get all of those forwarded to me, so I will be able to be contacted that way. And then my personal email is just leonjburris@gmail.com, no dots, no spaces or anything. Um, and I'm available for education or professional opportunities. So thank you for allowing me to present today.